Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's webcast. It's June 21st. We'll be speaking with Helga Zepp LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and its chairman. This is an incredible moment in history. We're a week away from the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, where there's a potential for a historic turning point around the idea that Lyndon LaRouche had put forward more than almost 2 decades ago of a four-power agreement to establish a new financial system, a new Bretton Woods. At the same time, there's an incredible war mobilization coming from the war party trying to defend the bankrupt system. But I think to start this, we really have to address this question of LaRouche's exoneration and the initiative that was taken by LaRouche PAC and the Schiller Institute with release of 2 new videos, one of which is called The LaRouche Case, Robert Mueller's first hit job. And the second video is of the memorial event that took place in New York City 2 weeks ago. So Helga, why don't you give a sense of the mobilization that's underway around the exoneration and the importance of these 2 videos coming out, released today, in fact.
Well, it may not be obvious for many people, but if Lyndon LaRouche is not exonerated, I do not think that we can stop the present drumbeat to World War III, because his exoneration and sort of neutralizing the war machine which is driving the world towards World War III, that's one and the same thing, because it was that apparatus which prosecuted my husband innocently, despite the fact that he was completely innocent of all accusations, which is exactly the war party driving the world to the verge of extinction. And today we have launched an international operation simultaneously in many countries around the globe, with the release especially of the documentary The LaRouche Case. And I would urge all viewers, all of you who are watching this program, to immediately go on our website, download the video, look at it, send the link to every possible contact you have, email lists, social media, just anybody you know, and help us to spread this internationally. Because this video, which shows the case of Lyndon LaRouche, where we have the absolute authoritative voices of his former lawyer, Odin Anderson, and former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, going into the reasons why the LaRouche case is the most incredible case of bending and destruction of US justice in the history of the United States. Now, our aim is to get these videos out everywhere and get acted on, which means we need to have the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. The reason why this is so absolutely important is it is, to my best judgment and that of my colleagues, the only way how you can stop World War III. Now, the reason is very simple, that the same apparatus which prosecuted my husband in the 80s and continued that in the 90s and 2000s is the same machine which is right now the driving force to for the confrontation against Russia and China. And just to mention how absolutely urgent this is and how close we are to what could become World War III is the fact that, according to a tweet of Trump, the order to attack Iran after they shot down the US drone was already given. And 10 minutes of the attack, which had as a target 3 sites in Iran, Trump called the attack off. According to his own tweet, he asked the relevant military commanders of how many casualties such an attack on Iran would have. And they said around 150. And then he said, this is out of proportion, and he called off the attack. Now, this is an incredible story, because if this would have happened, we may have been on the way to World War III, and that is not an exaggeration. The drumbeat for war was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, just take it a couple of step backs. You had the New York Times article, saying that the U.S. security forces, Pentagon, and so forth had escalated the cyber attack against Russia behind the back of Trump, which Trump called treason. And then you had the story that supposedly the Iranian guards were behind the attack on the 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. Now, this is in all likelihood another one of these fake news, false flag operations. And it points to the fact that you have in the United States right now a dual power situation. And, as you mentioned, or as we'll discuss more, this is 1 week before the G20 meeting, where, if this blows up, that maybe the last chance to have peace will be lost. And on the other side, you have the potential of Trump meeting Putin and Xi Jinping in particular, and find a solution to the many problems of this world. So we are in a countdown, but as I said, the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche is absolutely crucial, because the only way you can disarm and neutralize the war party in the United States is to make that case basically the most prominent issue, because that points to the coherence between the war party today, the apparatus which is responsible for the cover-up of 9/11 and Russiagate. And people have to understand that connection.
And the video is available with a link on this website, and it's also available at LaRouche PAC. And Helga, from watching this video and then talking to people about it, what becomes clear is that even though the video is 20-something years, the hearings in 1995 or 96, more than 2 decades old, the topics are the same as what's occurring today. It's quite astounding, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think that the tribunal, which took place in 95, where a lot of international VIPs, American legislators, basically reviewed the case and heard the testimony of Odin Anderson and Ramsey Clark. I think this makes absolutely clear that that case of my husband has to be remedied. Now, I think that I would urge people to watch the video of the case of Lyndon LaRouche together with the admittedly long video of the memorial, because you have to see the two things together, because the prosecution and vilification of my husband, in complete contrast to his real life and works, which you get a glimpse of in the very beautiful video of the memorial. I mean, that really is the key message which has to be gotten out to the world, because, as I said in the tribunal, the crime against Lyndon LaRouche was not just that he was put innocently in jail, but what was also put in jail, so to speak, was the entire body of his ideas and solutions to the world crisis. And that is more urgently necessary than today. So again, I'm asking you, please take the time, watch these 2 videos, and then help us to get them around the globe in any channel you possibly can, because this is the key to solve the war danger. So that is my urgent appeal to all of you.
Now, as you said, we could have been at World War III as of last night. And while that was avoided, the push for this confrontation continues from the war party. Do you see any change in that as a result of the decision to pull back by President Trump?
Well, we have to see, I mean, I think this is a very incredible demonstration that indeed we have a dual power situation in the United States, and that has become a topic of public discussion. Just to review it again, because especially our international viewers may not have noticed that in the same way, but the fact that the New York Times had an article in which they bragged, and they referred to John Bolton saying this at a seminar of the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, that the US security forces, intelligence service, Pentagon escalated the already existing cyber warfare which had been ordered originally by Obama, that they escalated that, targeting the electricity grid of Russia. Now, this is not a small affair, because obviously the electricity grid in any country is supplying power for hospitals, for the military command and control, for water supplies, and it has to be regarded as an act of war. Now, Trump tweeted immediately saying this was treason. He also said it was somehow the whole story leaked in this way was fake news. And, for example, Professor Stephen Cohen, who is a very known Russian analyst in the United States, he pointed to the fact that in all likelihood, the New York Times leaked that story in order to ruin the potential of a summit between Trump and Putin at the upcoming G20 summit, as they have done so, and the media have done so before at many occasions. Every time there was a potential for a solution, they would leak something or do some outrageous act to sabotage such a summit. So this is one thing, and obviously this asks the question, if the president is not informed, I mean, who runs the United States? I mean, that's a question which is being asked by many people around the world who notice the fact that Trump is one thing, as demonstrated in him calling off this attack against Iran, but such members of his cabinet as Bolton, Pompeo, and others are clearly something different. So it is not clear who gives the orders. The same thing seemed to have happened in the case of Iran, where, this story is unbelievable. The Iranians, in response to the accusation, of that they were supposedly responsible for the attack on the two oil tankers, for which there is no proof. Several governments, including the German and the Japanese government, have demanded evidence, because this video clearly is which Pompeo issued is clearly no evidence. So then the Iranians basically shot down a drone. Now, the US said, this drone was in international waters, but the Iranians have now released a video which shows that not only the drone, but also a US aircraft took off from the United Arab Emirates, went into, the Gulf of Oman, returned, and then entered not only international waters, but, Iranian territory. According to the Iranian military commanders, they sent several warnings that these two US vehicles, the drone and the aircraft, had entered Iranian territory without getting any response. And then the Iranians shot down the drone, not shooting down the aircraft, as a warning to the United States. Now, this is absolutely, I mean, who does not wake up and know that we are on the verge of World War III? I mean, such a person is just not in the real world. I mean, we are closer to World War III than at any time, in the, I would say, in the entire post-war period. And that danger is not yet gone. I think it's a very good thing that Trump intervened in the last moment, but it was 10 minutes before the attack. I mean, people should really realize that, this is not a joke. And, again, the only way to answer that in the short term is to keep up the drumbeat for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. If you want to stop World War III, then help us to get the exoneration of LaRouche on the agenda internationally, but especially in respect to President Trump, who has a very good reason of doing it, because it would aim at the same forces which are behind Russiagate and who are giving him a hard time to carry out his intentions in respect of improving relations with Russia and China.
Helga, with the corruption of the media in the United States not covering these things in any way in detail or even in reality, the Russians have seemed to be much more blunt than ever in warning of the war danger. What can you say about that can help to wake people up to realize how close we are to this situation?
Well, President Putin warned that an attack on Iran would have catastrophic consequences. He also, immediately after the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, had said in an interview to MIA, a news agency, that the situation between the United States and Russia worsens by the hour. And I think that that is a fair description, because if you take in addition to what was published just now, namely the Joint Chiefs of Staff published for the first time since several years their nuclear strategy. And let me read to you a quote which makes it absolutely clear. I mean, this is a review of the nuclear strategy, the planning, targeting, command and control, and which includes the idea of use of nuclear weapons in any confrontation. So the quote I want to read to you is: "Using nuclear weapons could create conditions for decisive results and restoration of strategic stability. Specifically, the use of a nuclear weapon will fundamentally change the scope of a battle and create conditions that affect how commanders will prevail in conflict." Now, this is incredible. I mean, it is the idea you can use a nuclear weapon, as if not as many experts like Ted Postol and others have written long and very convincing articles that it is the nature of nuclear weapons that once you use one nuclear weapon, it's the logic of that kind of weapon system that all of them will be used. Now, that would in all likelihood mean the extinction of civilization. This report, which was published for a week and then suddenly withdrawn, and it only was reposted by the Federation of American Scientists, who wanted to, point out to the fact of this doctrine. Now, I think that all has to be seen together, and it underlines the absolute necessity, to neutralize the war party, which includes, emphatically the British, about whom Greg Murray, the former British ambassador, said that for the UK political system, government and media, the difference between fact and truth has completely vanished, and this should be of a grave concern to everybody, because the British role in instigating all of this is absolutely crucial. Now, it absolutely demonstrates that we have to change the paradigm, that the war party must be stopped, that Trump must be enabled to carry out his intentions to improve relations with Russia and with China, which he has stated many times. And that is really what I'm asking you, the viewers, to help us communicating, because I think there is the danger right now, like it was in 1914, without an in-depth mobilization of the people around the globe, but especially in the West, in Europe and in the United States, we are in great danger of sleepwalking into a new war, exactly like it happened in 1914. So join our mobilization to stop exactly that.
Going back to the question of Lyndon LaRouche's exoneration, it was precisely under similar circumstances in the late 1970s under the Carter administration, with lunatics like Brzezinski and others pushing for war, that Lyndon LaRouche intervened with the SDI. And the first case against the deployment against him came as a result of Ronald Reagan adopting his policy. I think that's another parallel that would be quite striking to people to understand why the attack today is a parallel to what was done to Lynn in the 1980s.
Well, I mean, the only way how at this late stage of the strategic game, so to speak, how we can get out of this situation would indeed be the kind of cooperation between not only the United States and Russia, as Lynn, as my husband, had proposed it to, at the time between the United States and the Soviet Union, but to emphatically also include China and India, because the argument he made was that you need the four most powerful countries in the world to end this British system of imperial control of the world. And, you know, this is extremely important. I mean, it would basically mean that hopefully at the G20 meeting, a summit does occur, which is right now planned, but, you know, be on your toes, because, you know, the week before the G20 summit, we have to expect efforts to destabilize that potential up to the last minute, as we have seen it now with this called off attack against Iran. But hopefully, you know, it comes to a summit between President Trump and Xi Jinping, and they would not only end the trade war, but, you know, come up with a comprehensive agreement. There should be also hopefully a summit between Trump and Putin. And, you know, if everything would go really well, you would have a summit between the four presidents. I mean, remember that following the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum and the SCO summit in Bishkek a couple of days later, the three presidents, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi, already met in Bishkek, and they said they would meet again in Osaka at the G20 meeting. So the best thing which could happen is that they would invite President Trump to join that summit, and that Trump would accept it. Because unless there would be an agreement to address the really pressing issue of a pending financial blowout of the system and go for a new Bretton Woods, which would take care of especially the needed credit system for the industrialization of the developing countries, and end the system of the casino economy as we have it now, by establishing a new credit system and have a new paradigm. You know, I think we need, we should discuss this question of a new paradigm a little bit more, but we need to have a completely different thinking in how to approach these strategic questions. Because if we remain in the area of geopolitics, in the idea that Europe has to become, you know, a strong unified bastion against other strong powers, United States, Russia, China, and if the United States think they have to contain China and the rise of China, if you stay in that kind of thinking, it is a question of time when this whole strategic situation will completely go haywire and go out of control. So let's mobilize to put the question of the four-power agreement for the G20 on the agenda and help us to mobilize for it, because this is maybe the last chance where this can be done, because it's very clear, you know, both strategically, militarily, but also concerning the financial situation, we are sitting on a powder keg, and therefore we need an urgent change in the entire approach.
I want to get back to the financial situation in just a moment, but one of the things that occurred to me is that in this possibility of a new discussion, especially if it comes from the American people demanding that there be some response to the danger of war, apparently there were some discussions in the Congress where people like Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, the usual war party supporters, were arguing that the 2002, I think it was, authorization to use military force, or 2001, is still valid. And under that, attacks could be launched. but there was some pushback against that. Do you know much about that discussion, Helga? And do you think there is a possibility that there could be some change in the overall debate in the country?
Yes, the head of the Iran desk at the State Department, in a hearing in the House Intelligence or Foreign Affairs Committee, basically let it be known that Pompeo, at a previous not public meeting, had argued that this Military Authorization Act, which was the reaction to the attacks of 9/11, would be still valid and enable the president to commit acts of war without going to the Congress. Now, there was a very interesting debate on Fox TV, which included the Democrat Garamendi from California, who strongly argued against that and said basically that that is not absolutely not the case, but that the president has to go to the Congress for approval of war, and especially because this 2001 War Act only refers to a military reaction in defense. But for example, in the case of this present Iran conflict, it would not have been in defense, because if you shoot down a drone, well, then there is no act of war against the United States. And if then the United States would retaliate a little bit later, it would not be in defense, but it would be a retaliatory action, and therefore it would demand the approval of Congress. Now, this is extremely important, because you did have indeed before this whole incident complete hype. Lindsey Graham, for example, he said, this is it. Now we have to take out the entire Iranian military. If we don't do that, then North Korea will attack. So you had an atmosphere of complete hysteria created. And therefore, I think, it was quite interesting that, Trump met with the entire congressional leadership and the military 2 days ago. Or even 2 days ago, and then afterwards, Pelosi and Schumer and so forth said that they were worried about also an accidental war breaking out. So I think that this all makes very, very clear that if this incident didn't go wrong, there is the danger that another incident will be created, another fake flag operation will be launched. And as long as what we call the British Empire, which is really this, this apparatus, which is, the imperial system of the City of London, of Wall Street, and, the kind of private security forces which are really carrying out the policies of that monetarist system, if this is not stopped and replaced by a credit system in the tradition of the American system, and a completely new set of international relations is established, as the countries of the Belt and Road Initiative have already done. And the United States must absolutely join this new paradigm. If you don't accomplish that, it's a question of time when another incident will be created, and then maybe the conditions could be a little bit less favored, and war could not be called off 10 minutes before it's launched. So please help us to get this idea really on the table, that the world is in an urgent need for a completely new thinking, a new era of mankind's history, where all the countries work together for the common aims of mankind. And that should happen fairly soon. The first step must be President Trump should join with these other major forces to establish a new Bretton Woods system, preferably at the G20, because time is really running out.
And also in the same time period, you have the exposure of the British Empire and its role in Russiagate and in launching the coup against President Trump, which puts the whole apparatus that attacked your husband in the 1980s and put him in prison. It shows that this apparatus was not stopped then when it could have been, and that it's now, once again, not just attacking President Trump and the voters who elected him, but pushing the world toward war. Now, with the breakdown of the financial system, this does put front and center the four-power agreement for a new Bretton Woods. I wonder if you have some thoughts on the reports that came out the last couple of days about the status of Deutsche Bank creating a so-called bad bank to offload $50 billion in derivatives obligations.
Well, that bad bank, of 50 billion, trillion, billion, whatever, they have 50 billion, is really a form of hiding a bankruptcy. It's nothing else than that. Because the Deutsche Bank has 40 trillion outstanding derivatives. Many of them are really level 3 derivatives, which means they are basically worthless. And this is 16 times the GDP of the German federal budget. There is an economist, Mark Friedrich, who basically pointed to the fact that now the stocks of Deutsche Bank are at 6 euro. If they go to 5 euro, in all likelihood, the German government would take over and nationalize Deutsche Bank. But he also correctly noted that if the Deutsche Bank would crash, then it would look Lehman Brothers like the famous peanuts because of the size and entanglement of the derivative apparatus of Deutsche Bank. Now, this is an urgent issue, and it is known and a matter of concern of China, but also of Russia. I thought the speech which Putin gave at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was quite remarkable in this respect, because he warned of a global financial breakdown by basically pointing to the fact that the powers to be in the West have done absolutely nothing to address the causes of the crash of 2008, that the quantitative easing just postponed the crash into the future, and that a complete change and a new system was really required, and going in the direction of the Chinese model and so forth. And he said something which I think is also quite noteworthy. He said, you have all these children and teenagers now who are so much concerned about the climate protection. They should be a little bit more concerned about the fact that we have a complete danger of a great global catastrophe in the form of nuclear war. And I think that is a message I want to reiterate, because all this hype about climate change, which we should take up in another program because it needs more discussion. But I think right now we need an urgent mobilization to address the causes of the war danger, which is the pending financial collapse, and the urgent need to replace it with a new financial system, a credit system, basically putting ad acta the present monetary system. And that has to be discussed at the G20, and all the leaders, including the Europeans, will be measured by history. Do they have the moral responsibility and the intellectual capacity to address this most pressing issue of the danger of a financial collapse and the danger of World War III by changing course entirely at the G20 meeting? So I can only reiterate, the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche is the absolute important step to accomplish both.
And Helga, just to conclude, I think it's worth reiterating again that the work of Lyndon LaRouche, which you can see from these two videos, his concern with the future of humanity and his prophetic insights will shock people. Someone I spoke to this afternoon who had just seen the preview, the trailer, just said that he can see now why the British were so afraid of LaRouche. And he said that it's clear that everything that we're seeing today in the attack against Trump was already done against LaRouche. And he said, how can we get people to recognize that? And I said, well, get this video around, get people to see it. So Helga, if you want to just one more time, I think this international mobilization idea is crucial, that people get this out, get it out as widely as possible, be as bold and courageous as you can in challenging people to think through what it is that the exoneration of LaRouche would represent for the world today. So Helga, final words from you on this.
Well, people may remember the words of Martin Niemöller, who said, first they come for your neighbors, then they come for the gypsies, then they come for the Jews. Well, one can only add, they already came for Lyndon LaRouche, they came for the US president, and you better help us now to change this entire dynamic. So please get these videos around and study them, because many people have been afraid, to go out with the idea that LaRouche represented powerful concepts to solve the world's crisis. And the entire prosecution was done with only one purpose: to, poison the well, to get people afraid. But, right now, to overcome that fear of joining forces with Lyndon LaRouche and the movement he created is what makes the difference between war and peace. So join our mobilization.
And again, you can find a link to the videos we've been discussing on the Schiller Institute website, and take advantage of that immediately. Helga, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, till next week.